Welcome, I'm Alex Graham-Heggie, and this is Our Heritage. As someone who studied history, I've always valued it as a source of perspective. And today we're going to get perspective on the recent few decades of the history of Owen Sound with local journalist, broadcaster, and host of Dave Carr Live, strangely enough, Mr. Dave Carr. How are you?
I love how that works out. Hi,
yeah,
Alex. Nice to see
it does work out well, doesn't it?
It does.
So you have been a resident of Owen Sound since the early 70s, I understand. Mm-hmm.
Oh, yeah.
And coming from...
Originally, Oak Park, Illinois, a suburb of Chicago, by route of Regina, Saskatchewan, and Hamilton, Ontario.
You've been around, very nice. So you started out as a journalist here on the radio, I understand?
Yeah, absolutely. I was away in the U.S. Army and started taking a broadcasting course when I was getting out of the Army in the late 60s, early 70s, and when I completed the course and started knocking on doors, CFOS in Owen Sound gave me a job.
Oh, fantastic. And I do recall hearing you on the radio when I was younger. And what was your overall impression of Owen Sound when you arrived in the 1970s?
I came here in the fall of 72. It was September of 72 when I came for my audition and meeting and stuff. Never been up this way. I don't think I'd ever been north of Guelph at that point. I'd been all kinds of other places, but in Ontario, I'd never been north of Guelph. And it's fascinating to come, and the trees have grown in 40 years, but back then, to come over the hill, coming in on Highway 6 and 10, and see the water for the first time. And it was a beautiful sunny autumn day, early September. And I thought, yeah, this is going to be okay. And I was coming here just for a weekend job and, really part-time. And I was newly married, and so there were a lot of uncertainties. But just come over the hill and see the water. This is going to be okay.
At the beginning.
Yeah.
So covering news in Owen Sound, it's what stories stood out locally? I think you told when we were talking earlier. You spoke of a series of fires that were quite the talk of the town at the time.
Our owner at the time was a local boy, born and bred in Owen Sound, started working at CFOS, I think, when he was a very young man in 1940, and when it went on the air. And he always believed in the intense locality of what we did at CFOS, that they could get federal news and provincial news and world news. They could get it almost anywhere, but nobody could tell them what was happening on the main street of Owen Sound, like a radio station like CFOS. So we were intensely local, and as a result, wound up. When I came here, we had a news staff of maybe 3, but within about 5 or 6 years, we had a news staff of probably 10 or 11. Unusually large, but so totally committed to not just Owen Sound, but the region. When we were talking earlier, the fires in Owen Sound back then really stand out. And I suppose that's one of the reasons why I sort of prick up my ears when I hear the fire trucks going out, or, they come by my house, I don't know, 2 or 3 or 4 times a week. I'm not sure they're ever actually going to a fire anymore. I think they're going to accidents, carbon monoxide calls, smoke alarm calls, and false alarms. But significant fires are rare. But back in the 70s and early 80s, especially downtown, the Olympia restaurant, which would have been near the corner of 10th Street and 2nd Avenue East, just a door or 2 up from the Bank of Commerce. It burned. The Scopus restaurant, where the Bank of Nova Scotia is now, it burned. The Adanac Hotel, Big Nickel Apartments, and I can't remember what it was called even before that, but it's where the CFOS parking lot is now, right across from the Roxy Theater. It burned to the ground. There was a fire in the Alps restaurant. I'm trying to remember which side of the Roxy Theater the Alps, but it was right by the Roxy Theater, right across from from CFOS. I think it was roughly maybe where Jasmine's is now, kind of right in there. It burned somewhere along in there outside of downtown. Keenan Industries, a major factory on the shore down past where the Lumley Bay shore is now. It burned, or it had a fire anyway.
Okay, yeah. And of course, and it was just like a run of bad luck. Ultimately, was what it was. It wasn't like anyone.
There was no connection to the fires. Yeah.
Yeah.
One was an insurance fire. One, I think, was a smoking fire. And the others, one of the restaurant fires may have been a grease fire. I'm not sure. But no, they were all not connected. Two of them happened on consecutive St. Patrick's days. So third time around, the St. Patrick's Day approached. We were starting to make book on where the annual St. Patrick's Day fire would be.
Yes, I can see why. And then, so as you say, the local news body grew, but at first it was mainly the sort of national, provincial, world news side of things.
It was always local from the day I got here, and I think if you hear that today, if you listen to CFOS in particular, out of all the stations that company now owns, if you listen to the AM 560 station in particular, I think you still hear, they start local. I mean, they unless the bottom falls out of the world, they lead local. They're predominantly local. And I think it's everything.
I like that turn. I like that turn of phrase you use. Were there ever times that you remember? Any particular times that stand out when, as you say, the bottom did fall out of the world? What were some that happened?
I was, in the most recent big thing, I was at home getting ready to go to work when 9/11 happened, and we stayed on the air. I went into work at that point, and the enormity of it just kept growing and growing and growing, and we stayed on the air all day with that, to abandon all our regular programming. 1977, I think it would be, I was working when Elvis Presley died. There was a major disaster back then, There was a major disaster back then when there was a skywalk between a hotel and a convention center in Kansas City, and it fell in one night, and a number of people were killed. And I was working that night, and those are the moments that you stop and say, well, what do we do about this? And we used to have, back then, we had the old teletype that actually type. You could hear it. You could hear it typing, and we had to sort of look at it and say, flash. Elvis Presley has died. And the first thing you want to say is, come on. And there are people who would rush and put that on the air, say it came off the teletype, it must be true. We actually held back for a few minutes until we got a confirmation that this was actually not a, very much so. It's and 'twas ever this at CFOS, and it should be everywhere. Get it first, but get it right. And so we had a pretty good history of either waiting for a confirmation or actually jumping and going and looking for who else is saying this. But we beat everybody still, even waiting, we beat everybody. Which, it's nice to be truthful and factual and informative, but internally you're competitive. You want to be first.
So, solid journalism.
Right.
Solid journalism. So we'll resume, and I'm going to talk a little bit about Owen Sound as it is and as it has been when we come back. We'll just break it up a bit here, and then Yeah. All right, Dave. I think when you're my age, you're used to. I can remember getting old enough to notice that just about every toy I owned as little kids had "Made in China" on it somewhere. So that being the case, I don't know how cognizant people are of Owen Sound or local Canadian industrial history, but Owen Sound did have a fairly substantial industrial base at times.
It did.
Yeah, there is, of course, you and I are both train enthusiasts. This was a switchover point for the railways, was it not?
Well, it was. It was a northern terminal for two lines. The CP line came out of Markdale, in Orangeville, Markdale, into Owen Sound, and the CN line came out of Stratford and into Owen Sound, and then there was the fish line, which was off the CN line that went up to Wyerton, obviously for all the Georgian Bay whitefish that in those days was being caught. But when I came to Owen Sound, and people who are older than me will remember this much more vividly than I, the two lines came up sort of north of Owen Sound, and then they looped down in these big curves and came down the two sides of the harbor to 10th Street, essentially, and where First Avenue East is now was the CP line, and it just came down alongside the harbor and crossed 10th Street and went up First Avenue East behind the Main Street stores.
I live in that area. I never noticed a trace of it.
It's a street now, and no, all traces of it are gone. The CN line came in, and if you're out by, let's say, Kelso Beach Park or whatever, there's the rail trail that kind of goes by right in front of Kelso Beach Park, and then it angles sort of down in by the Marine and Rail Museum. That was the track where the caboose is. But when it got down sort of closer into town, roughly where the Chichimon berths now, there was a bridge that angled across the harbor north of the 10th Street Bridge, and the two rail lines met right there. And there was a rail crossing with lights and arms on 10th Street at First Avenue East, and there were a couple of shunting engines down there because goods would come, let's say, out of Toronto, destined for somebody on the west side or destined for some, and they were shunting boxcars back and forth. That's what was going on at 10th Street. So these engines would take 2 or 3 boxcars up First Avenue East, halfway towards 9th Street, and then somebody'd have to throw a switch and they'd come back down, whoop, over onto the CN line, hook up to whatever was, and off they'd go.
As long as they're not making me do it.
Well, they weren't making any of us do it, but people complain about the traffic jams at 10th Street now, and we were sitting there waiting for trains many times a day.
And there was manufacturing going on. There was a particular point of manufacturing here in Owen Sound that I heard about that struck me as odd. That apparently this was the major center for toothpicks.
Owen Sound was at that time the toothpick capital of the world, self-proclaimed, I'm sure. But Keenan Industries was a major woodworking plant here, and they were down on the shore north of where the Bayshore is now. They might have been roughly where the Bayshore is, but I think they were even maybe a little bit north of that. And they were a wood baking plant, but Keenan toothpicks, and didn't matter where you went in the world, you could find Keenan toothpicks. And we were the flat toothpick capital of the world. You can get flat toothpicks and you can get round toothpicks. Most everybody has round toothpicks now, but we were the flat toothpick capital of the world. Yeah.
Gotcha. And what about I'm walking down the main drag on sort of down by the river, and there's the main street with all of its stores and the bingo hall and all this sort of thing. How has that area evolved? What's changed? What's new? What's stayed on?
To me personally, I mean, downtown is much more vibrant than it was maybe in 1972. But it was more traditional in 1972. it was retail. It was small, local, mom and pop retail. Down near 10th Street, you had Manjuris Smoke Shop, and you had McKay Brothers Dry Goods, and you had Warlow's, you had Thompson's Furniture, Leggett's Furniture. I'm not sure who else there were. You had T.I. Thompson's hardware store, which later on became a T.I. Thompson's Home Hardware store. It was more retail. Now it's more service oriented, from bingo to financial services to a number of professionals to a number of social agencies and so on. The banks are a little more spread out than they used to be. There are still three.
Yep.
At what we call the four banks corners. The fourth bank is now a pizza.
Yeah.
That's 9th and 2nd East.
Right, yeah, I know it well. Whereas, the retail is sort of migrated a little bit. Heritage Place Mall was the go-to place when I was a kid, certainly.
Okay, well, you're dating yourself, and the mall would have been fresh and new. But when I came to Owen Sound, the Grey County Mall had been open for maybe a year, maybe not quite a year, and that was on the Sunset Strip. It's where the Galaxy Cinema is now.
Okay.
And it was Woolco, and I really can't. The Village Inn restaurant was in there. There was a hobby shop in there. And other than Woolco, I can't remember what else was out there.
What was the reaction to having to that transition to malls?
Well, see, that was the first mall in Owen Sound, and in Owen Sound, late for municipalities getting malls. Everybody said, everybody downtown, and it's been an interesting history. This has played itself out about 3 times in Owen Sound. Downtown said, oh, we can't possibly have a mall, it's going to kill us. And the mall, in fact, strengthened downtown. The arrival of the Grey County Mall, in fact, strengthened downtown Owen Sound because it brought new people from further away who said, as long as we're here, let's go downtown. In the 80s, there was another great mall debate. The Heritage Place Mall was one of, I think, maybe 3 proposals that then became 2 proposals, including a pedestrian mall downtown north of the Coach Inn, roughly heading down towards where the Metro is now with the A&P. Okay, they were going to cover that street, close it off, and make it a pedestrian mall. In hindsight, that would have been interesting, the interruption of the flow of traffic that way with everything else that's happened. But that was a mall proposal. The Heritage Place people won out. Cadillac Fairview was the first owner-operator of Heritage Place Mall. And everybody said, well, a peripheral mall, that's just going to kill us. By this time, places like Brantford, downtown Brantford, were in absolute ruins, and people were pointing to municipalities like that and saying, don't do this, don't do this. But in places like Owen Sound, the peripheral mall again built us up, especially a Cadillac Fairview Mall, because the Barrie had opened Georgian Mall.
Right.
Everybody was going to Barrie,
right.
To the big stores in Barrie. All of a sudden, you had a mall here in Owen Sound. People didn't have to, and the people who lived, let's say, in Thornbury and Collingwood, no longer had to go. They said, well, let's go the other direction and see what's going on in Owen Sound. And again, they said, as long as we're here, let's go downtown.
Yeah. And there you go. And then, of course, nowadays we're making the migration over to big box stores.
And we now have 3 big box stores in Owen Sound, which means, once again, people don't have to go to the south end of Barrie, to go to the big box stores there. We've got 3 here, and I think more are coming. I think Heritage Grove is still in its infancy, which is the 3 box stores on the east side of Owen Sound. I think you're going to see more development there. And again, you're going to see more people saying, let's go downtown. Our downtown in 2013 won a Heritage Architectural Award, won a significant Heritage Award for our downtown. I think people come to see those kinds of things. Collingwood has a gorgeous downtown. So I think people come to see those things while they're going to, the big box stores.
Well, and now they'll be able to see, they're watching us today, they'll be able to go and remember where the rail lines in the industry were.
They will.
Interesting reflection.
I don't know if you can still see even any of the pilings in in the water. If you were to go down to 10th Street, just north of the 10th Street Bridge, and just look, you might see where that bridge crossed on an angle, headed towards the end of the 10th Street Bridge, the eastern end.
Well, you watching at home are going to have to find out, but don't go yet because we will be back in a minute. We're back, looking back on Owen Sound's history with Dave Carr. Dave, to discuss being a newcomer to Owen Sound, what was it like in Owen Sound? What struck you about it as someone new to town when you first arrived?
It's hard to think back to that, but I mean, I've been here for 44 years and I'm still a newcomer, so to some people. I'm trying to think back. It was quaint. It was small. I was born and grew up in the Chicago area, so towns like Owen Sound, it was still dry when I came here. The wet vote happened. That was the first election I covered in Owen Sound. I just missed the federal election that put Dr. Gus Mitchell in as our MP. I just missed that election in the summer or spring of '72, but in the fall of '72, the municipal election that year was the year that Owen Sound voted to go wet.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Thank heavens.
Yeah. And so say almost everybody, not quite, but almost,
sure
yeah.
And yeah, it did seem a smaller place at the time.
Absolutely. Things like the rails downtown, and everybody knew everybody. We had a Kresge's on the main street, and the Kresge's was where I think the bingo hall is now, and the Kresge's lunch counter was everybody. You met everybody you knew at the Kresge's lunch counter. Yeah. Well, yeah, very much so. Only it was a Kresge's lunch counter. And everything that connoted in the 40s, 50s, and 60s. Kresge's lunch counter was what it was. Yeah. And
it was funny you mentioned the elections that you were arriving for. You're a journalist, and I'm always interested because of course I grew up reading the history books that talk about that era of Pierre Trudeau, Joe Clark, and them. Politics, of course, is getting quite hot button in the news these days. What do you find is different about the way politics is covered and about the way it works?
It's not gentlemanly anymore at all. But then again, neither is warfare. And you might draw some analogies between the two. I'm just reading a biography of General Grant, in which somebody asks him in most polite terms, we should get together and talk about what the terms of surrender. And General Grant replies, I received your letter of yesterday, this date, and I'm sorry to tell you that we will accept no. It was terribly, terribly polite. I remain your obedient servant. It was terribly, terribly polite. Well, warfare's not like that anymore. We have drones, and you don't never see it coming, and I think politics is the same way. I think you've always had partisan politics. You've always had conservatives and liberals, the CCF morphing into the New Democrats, the arrival of the Green Party, and some fragmentation in this country has been a very big thing. The Americans are still purely a two-party system. There might be 30 names on the ballot, but you know they're essentially a two-party system. In Canada, we are, in Ontario now at least a four-main party system, and you can vote Libertarian and Christian Farmer and a number of other. But in the big sense of it, with the liberals and the liberals and the conservatives and the New Democrats, it's become much more acrimonious. There's much more infighting. I think locally, politicians and candidates are still civil to each other, mostly friendly to each other. I think the further away you go from Owen Sound or from Grey and Bruce counties, I think the more strident it gets. I know all kinds of politicians who would slug it out all day, call each other the most horrendous things, accuse each other of all sorts of things in the parliamentary body, and 3 hours later would be having supper. And I don't think that happens anymore. I think they call each other whatever they're going to call each other in the parliamentary body, and 3 hours later they're sitting on opposite sides of the restaurant, and the conservatives with conservatives and the liberals with liberals, and now they might have a drink at a social function, but I think a lot of the genuine camaraderie, which was honorable. You know, and they say, you know, at the two upper levels of government, some honorable members, you know, but I think that's gone out of it.
It's been a fascinating story that it's had getting to where it is.
Oh, absolutely, and it's rich and it's deep. People say Canadians don't have much exciting history. Even a place like Owen Sound and Grey Bruce, there's fabulous stories to be told here.
So, and you can go looking for some of those stories. Dave and I have talked about some built heritage that you can go to see the sites that it stood on. Some of them are still there. And a wonderful perspective on where we are and where we've come from. That's what history is for. That's what I like about it. And I hope you've enjoyed that. So, we'll see you next time on Our Heritage. I'm Alex Graham Hagee. Dave Carr, thank you very much.
Nice to be here.
See you next time.